Welcome into Texans Today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and coming up on today's show, we're breaking down 10 free agent targets the Texans should be interested in this offseason. Now, I'm not saying the Texans are going to get every single one of these guys or that the Texans, are even going to be interested in some of these guys. But in my opinion, I think the Texans should be interested in some of these guys because I'm going to break down what I think some of the biggest weaknesses on this Texans squad is and, possibly some free agents that can immediately come in and fix those weaknesses for your Houston Texans. Now, the first name on this list, and it's a running joke here at Chat Sports, that every single show, every single channel here at Chat Sports, all 32 teams, maybe besides the Ravens, are going to have this guy on their list. It's Tyler Linderbaum. He is the best free agent interior offensive lineman available this offseason, and I want him. And I want him real bad because I really think he would help this Texans front unit out a ton. He is a very talented guy. The Texans, they had an opportunity to go out and get Tyler Linderbaum, but they decided to get Kenyon Green instead. So not that bad of a decision, right? Right? No, it was a horrible decision to not get Tyler Linderbaum. And we do have a couple of those graphics to go to because Linderbaum, he's been good for the Baltimore Ravens. The problem is they're paying Lamar Jackson a ton of money, a lot of these guys a ton of money. I don't know if they'll be able to keep Linderbaum in Baltimore, but look at these PFF grades from this season. 79 overall, the pass blocking, 63.5, the run blocking, and that has been one of the worst areas for the Houston Texans offensive line this season is run blocking, an 83.2 grade. I mean, really good. This year, 79.4, as I said, an overall grade by PFF. His sacks allowed 2. He allowed 1 hit, 23 pressures, and 4 penalties at that center position. He is the prize jewel for free agency if you need offensive line help. And a little tricks of the trade, every single team needs offensive line help in the NFL. Even the best teams in the NFL will probably say, yeah, we'd be willing to upgrade at the offensive line if we could. And I think Tyler Linderbaum would be a massive upgrade over Jake Andrews. The whole thing is, I think he's going to be the top paid center in free agency. You'll probably have to give him $20 million a year if you want Linderbaum's services. Is Nick Caserio willing to dole out that kind of money? I don't think so. But I can only hope, right? I can only hope. If you agree with me, though, do you want to beef up the O-line? Do you want to... I'm live right now on Texans Today. I go live every Wednesday. My live poll is what position do the Texans need to focus on in free agency? 78% say the offensive line. If you agree, hit that like button because I think the O-line should 100% be a priority for your Houston Texans. All right, next up, let's look at another offensive lineman. And I didn't want to go with just the most expensive guy. The top 3 guys. This is a kind of secondary option if the Texans want to spend a little less money. I'm going to go with Dylan Parham, offensive lineman for the Las Vegas Raiders. Plays left guard, and I think if the Texans' plan is to move Tytus Howard back out to right tackle, this could be a very intriguing option for the Houston Texans. Now, not incredible numbers for Parham this year with the Raiders, but he was on a horrible team. When you're on a team that his left tackle, Colton Miller, got injured halfway through the year and the center got moved over and everything got kind of moved around, you're not going to play well. And if you want to know how bad it was in Las Vegas this year, just search up Brennan Carroll, read some of the stories that are going on in Las Vegas, and then you'll be like, wow, I can't believe Dylan Parham scored in the 60s for PFF with all that shit show going on with the Las Vegas Raiders. But I think he's a decent player. And if the Texans are looking to bring in some more talent, he gives you flexibility. He can play center and guard. I think if you want a lower level, a cheaper option in free agency, he's definitely somebody that I would look at. And I know it said 285 there for his weight. I think he plays closer to around that 300-pound mark. I think he could be a sneaky good free agent option for Nick Caserio if he wants to add to this offensive line in the offseason. We expect that they probably draft some guys, but also why not do both? Like Porque los dos. Add in free agency, add in the draft. And I think Dylan Parham could be an interesting name that the Texans could add in free agency. I'm going another offensive lineman. It's O-line frenzy here on Texans Today because I want the big boys. I want them. I want them. Nobody clipped that. Braden Smith, offensive lineman. And this is a double doozy for you because not only do you sign maybe the best tackle in free agency in Braden Smith, but also you steal somebody away from your competitor in the Indianapolis Colts. He plays right tackle, so he would fit in right there. And with Braden Smith, I just talked about, if your goal is to keep Tytus Howard at right tackle, maybe you go out and sign a guard. If your goal is to push Tytus Howard and keep him at left guard, well, then why not go out there and sign a right tackle in Braden Smith? This past year, some okay numbers, overall grade of 65.3, pass blocking grade of 71.9, only 1 sack allowed, which when you think about it, the fact that he had Phillip Rivers as his quarterback and he allowed 1 sack, that's pretty darn impressive. Phillip Rivers can move as much as my grandpa right now. So the fact that he only allowed 1 sack in the season and he had Phillip Rivers quarterback that team for, 3 or 4 games? Not too bad. Not too bad, right? Only 6 hits, 26 pressures on the year. I think he could be a decent option. Now, the other part of it with Braden Smith is that he's also going to be a more expensive option for the Houston Texans. Like I said, probably one of the top tackles in free agency. So you would have to break the bank just a little bit on Smith if you want to bring him in. But, Tytus Howard, which he's actually not a free agent. He's going to be on the team next year, sorry. Was going pretty quick with my graphics before this, but Tytus Howard, he could be a free agent if you cut him. Tytus Howard, this is going to be a major question for what the Texans do moving forward because like I mentioned, where they decide to move him, where they decide to place Tytus Howard going into free agency, bam, that's why Reed's one of the best in the business. Shout out to producer Reed. Where they decide to put Tytus Howard and where they decide to, keep him going into next year, also kind of behind the scenes stuff, they're also looking at some contract situation with Tytus Howard. So will he be a Houston Texan next year? I think so, but, also some interesting stuff to look at there. I think this is going to be the major question mark for this team. And Tytus Howard, whether he plays at left guard or right tackle, will kind of dictate what the Texans do, not only in free agency, but also in the NFL draft. So I'm going to ask you folks at home, where do you think Tytus Howard should play next year? If you think it's guard, type G. If you think it's tackle, type T. Let me know down below in the comments section. Where do you think Tytus should play? Because personally, I think he's a better tackle than he is guard, and I'd rather push him out to right tackle. You have your tackle situation figured out with Tytus Howard and Aireontae Ersery, and then just beef up the interior. Go get those interior guys. Go get a Linderbaum. Go get a Dylan Parham. That's what I would do. But, if you think the Texans can upgrade at tackle, I can definitely see you possibly wanting to keep him at the guard spot. All right, I've talked enough about offensive linemen. Let's go ahead and talk about another position. Running back. And this is one that we all wanted at the trade deadline, and I think we were all kind of upset that the Texans weren't able to pull off a trade. Now, it did come out after the trade deadline that the Texans were interested in Breece Hall and even, sent over an offer. The Jets, obviously it wasn't enough that they couldn't refuse because they went ahead and refused it. They did not accept the Texans' offer to trade Breece Hall, but he's going to be an interesting name in free agency because the running back market, I think it's on the uptick, right? It's a spot that before not a lot of people really took seriously. Not a lot of people really cared to invest in a ton. But now, I think so. And Breece Hall, he's one of the better running backs in free agency. And having Breece Hall, him and Woody Marks in the backfield as a 1-2 punch is very enticing. This past year on a very bad Jets team, still eclipsed his first season of over 1,000 rushing yards. And every year, he is a dual threat back who can not only run but catch the ball out of the backfield. As you see those past 2 seasons, over 400 and over 500 receiving yards for Breece Hall. I think he's an electric running back, still really young. I believe he's only 26, 27 years old. So adding a guy like Breece Hall could be a very interesting move for your Houston Texans. Now, they could easily go out and draft another running back in the 3rd or 4th round, but you already did that this past year with Woody Marks. So wait, why not get a guy who you know what you're getting in Breece Hall, spend a little bit of money in free agency, and kind of beef up this Texans offense? Because as you're going to see in my next one, I don't have any wide receivers on this list. I think the Texans are pretty good at the wide receiver spot. I'd rather them beef up the O-line, beef up running back, and then also beef up the tight end spot. Cade Otton is my last Texans free agent target on this video on the offensive side, because I think the Texans could definitely use an upgrade at the tight end spot as well. Dalton Schultz had himself quite the year, but he's getting up there in age. He's starting to get into the dirty 30s. So on a last year of his contract where the Texans can save $8 million by cutting him, that is a very realistic option for the Houston Texans. And if they do that, they're going to have to replace him with another player either in free agency or in the draft. And I think Cade Otton is a very interesting choice. Been a decent receiving option, and I think he's also a pretty good blocking option for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I don't know if they're going to want to bring him back in free agency, depending on what they do there with their possible new OC, whoever they want to bring in. So Cade Otton could be a very interesting name for the Houston Texans. This season, only 2 drops. You like to see those touchdown numbers up a little bit, but you get 2 Cades in one room. Cade Otton, Cade Stover. We're getting Cade crazy in H-Town. we're getting a lot of Cades in H-Town. So I think this could be another good option. Now, there are a lot of tight ends in free agency that we could have picked from, right? Also Chig Okonkwo from the Tennessee Titans is another big name. Dallas Goedert, who did you say? Kyle Pitts is another one. Yeah, there's a lot of tight ends in free agency this year. So with that amount of surplus at tight end, maybe you could get a Cade Otton on a little bit of a discount because he's not one of the top 3 tight ends in this free agency class. But as my guy Reed, our producer, he's actually the host of our Bucks channel. Shout out to Reed Barkus. He said he's a pretty good red zone target as well. Big body guy. So I could definitely see the Texans adding in another tight end, whether that's in free agency or the draft. Now, coming up, defensive free agent targets for the Houston Texans. And I know you're probably thinking, we should just spend everything on offense. We don't need anything on defense, Jeremy. I know, but let's talk about some possible guys that we can add to this historic defense to keep the steam rolling ahead in 2026. Before I give you those options, quick word from our sponsor over at PrizePicks. The big game, it's almost here, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than PrizePicks. Where it feels good to be right, and since the big game is right around the corner, that also means it's your last chance to get in on the football action before next season. So close the season out right with PrizePicks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. Do you miss fantasy football? I know I do. PrizePicks lets you play fantasy football every week. Pick your favorite players and win when they hit their projections. And for this weekend, before we get to the big game, you got to play these games, right? And, I'm going to be a little bit of a Patriots hater. I don't care. I'm going less on the Drake May. I'm going more on the Stidham. Let's go, Stiddy, because I honestly don't want to see the Pats go to another big game. Let's just put it like that. Also, I have 2 guys in the other matchup that we're going to see. This one was interesting. Blake Corum, 0.5 receiving yards, and it's also a demon pick, which means it's going to be a higher payout. Okay, I'll take the more on that. And then Cooper Kupp playing, against his former team. I'll go more on that as well. You can use my lineup or go ahead and make your own. Just do it with our friends over at PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Join the millions of users and sign up today. Download the PrizePicks app and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, let's go on the defensive side now. This one's a little bit more on the margins, but why not take your biggest strength and maybe make it like a insane superpower? Because I think if you add an interior defensive lineman, somebody who can play that 3 technique, like a John Franklin Myers, I mean, they already can't block the Texans' D-line. You have Danielle Hunter, you have Will Anderson Jr., and then you add John Franklin Myers to that. I think you'll have opposing offenses shaking in their boots. This past year for the Denver Broncos, 7.5 sacks, 39 pressures, 26 tackles, 6 tackles for loss. I mean, that would be insanity. Insanity if the Texans added a guy like this. And, I mean, I know what you're saying, Jeremy. We don't need a guy like John Franklin Myers. Of course we don't need him. That doesn't mean I don't want him, right? Like, look at these numbers the past couple of years. 2 straight seasons with 7 sacks as a guy who plays on the interior is incredible. So, yeah, I would go ahead and look at adding a guy like John Franklin Myers. He might want a certain price tag that the Texans aren't willing to match, but if the price is right, if he's willing to come down to H-Town, I'd be willing to have him. And like I said, I think, yeah, it's not your biggest need. I mean, I think it's probably the least amount of need is your pass rush. Out of every single thing wrong with this Texans team, the pass rush is probably the very last thing that you're thinking about. But if you're taking a strength and making it an even bigger strength, good luck to every other offensive line out there. Now, let's talk about somebody who's not as much of a pass rusher, but a familiar name for this Texans squad, because I think something that the Texans will need is more interior defensive line help, especially at the defensive tackle spot. I'm looking at DJ Reader, a former Houston Texan, and the numbers aren't going to, pop off the page, 11 tackles on the year, but you're losing possibly a guy like Sheldon Rankins. You're possibly losing a couple other guys on the interior. Tim Settle, maybe. You're gonna need a big body. And DJ Reader's a big body, 6'3", 335 pounds. And he's not a guy that's going to get a lot of tackles for loss. What he will do, though, and he's going to help the linebacking core, is he's going to eat up those blocks on the interior. He's going to have where 2 offensive linemen need to try to block DJ Reader. That allows Henry Toto. That allows Azeez Al-Shire to make those tackles and knife through the line into the backfield. And that's what a big guy like DJ Reader gives you. And obviously, like I said, a former Texan. And actually, it's funny, I didn't really mean to do this, but I have 2 former Texans back-to-back. DJ Reader, I'm going to go with Roy Lopez as well, another former Texan on the interior. And everything that I said about DJ Reader, I'm going to need you to Command C and then Command V. That's, for the non-nerds out there, copy and then paste. Same exact thing. Everything that I just said about DJ Reader, Roy Lopez. You need one of those big body guys who's just going to eat up blocks on the interior. That's what Lopez gives you. This past year with the Detroit Lions, 31 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 5 QB hits, 13 pressures. I think he's another decent name. He's much younger than DJ Reader, and I think will probably want a larger contract today. So possibly a little bit out of your price range, but I would be interested in a guy like Roy Lopez. As you see, 2022 was a member of the Houston Texans. Why not bring him back to H-Town and add him to this Texans defensive line? Because I think the interior is definitely going to need a little bit of help for Houston in this offseason. All right, we went around the defensive line. I'm actually going to skip linebacker because you have Azeez Al-Shire, you have Henry Toto. I think those 2 guys will be your starters next year as well. You are losing a couple guys like E.J. Speed, so I don't know if linebacker is a necessity either, because the Texans, most of the time they run a 4-2-5. That's 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, 5 DBs, with Jalen Petrie being like that 3rd linebacker. So I don't really view linebacker as a massive need. I think they could easily just draft another guy in this year's draft and add some linebacker help there. I'm going to go to the secondary. Somebody who the Texans just faced. I'm going to go with Jaylinn Hawkins, who currently is a safety for the New England Patriots. And yeah, we saw how good the Patriots defense was. I think, if you can't beat them, why not steal from them? So bring in Jaylinn Hawkins, into the upside down. Shout out to Stranger Things. But Jaylinn Hawkins, I think, would be a great pair on the back end with Kalen Bullock. You tell me you add this to a defense that's already been incredible this year, I'd be okay with that. 72 tackles, 3 tackles for loss. He had 6 PBUs, 4 interceptions this season. His coverage stats are not bad, right? 64% completion percentage when targeted. A 73.4 QB rating when targeted. I think the fact that, you have such a great defense already, adding to it, seems kind of, overzealous of me. But like I said, the same thing with John Franklin Myers. Why not make a strength a bigger strength in your secondary? And you do need safety help. As good as the secondary was, as good as the defense was, I still think adding another safety to this team could help, because Jaylen Reed, who was a rookie this year, I thought he did really well, but not sure where he's going to be. And as producer Reed just whispered in my ear, I think, a little bit of an injury-prone guy this season, so possibly getting some backup help for that as well in a Jaylinn Hawkins. I think the Texans could definitely use some safety help, whether that's in free agency or the draft this year, because nothing against him, no tea, no shade, no pink lemonade, but I don't want to see Miles Bryant starting at safety next year for the Houston Texans. He's good. He's a good rotation guy. He's a good special teamer on this team, but he shouldn't be a starting safety. If I'm being honest, if I'm being truthful with y'all, I don't think he's at the level to be a starting safety. So we need to figure out that position next to Kalen Bullock for this next season. And that's where I go with my last free agent target as well. Geno Stone, a little bit of a cheaper option than a Jaylinn Hawkins, depending on where he wants to go as well. I think Geno Stone could be another good option for this Texans team. This past year, 104 tackles, 2 interceptions, 4 pass breakups. He could be another guy where, played good for Cincinnati this year. I think could even play better with this Texans defense because, these numbers in terms of tackling, I think he's a good, player in, run support, 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks on the year as well, 4 pass breakups, 2 interceptions on the year. The coverage stats, not great, right? 71% completion percentage when targeted, a quarterback rating of 110.4. But I will say this. It's hard whenever you don't have a great pass rush. And the Bengals really didn't have a great pass rush this year. So when you look at that, I think you add Geno Stone to a defense that has an incredible pass rush. Those numbers get exponentially better this year for Mr. Stone. And as I mentioned with Hawkins, I think the Texans sneakily need another safety to add to this team alongside Kalen Bullock, because Jalen Petrie plays more of as a third linebacker than a true safety. Jalen Petrie's awesome, but adding another safety, I think, could definitely help this Texans squad. Here are my free agent targets on defense. If you don't remember, here are also my free agent targets on offense. Let me know. Did I miss anybody? Did I forget anything? Did I leave anything out? Because I will be making a ton of free agent target videos throughout the offseason, because beginning of March, when the tampering period and free agency period begins, and then it's on like Donkey Kong. We're getting it here on Texans Today. That's the end of today's show, though. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at Jeremy Chugs. And if you made it to the end of today's video, make sure you hit that sub button for free Texans content all